There is a movie that came out starring Tom Hanks
2000?
in the year 2000.
Passion of Christ.
No. Tom Hanks.
Castaway?
Castaway.
Good job, Jim.
All right. So, in the movie, Tom Hanks is an airline pilot.
Yes.
Remember? And he crashes on an island.
Yeah.
Yes, he was a FedEx pilot, and he crashes. And instead of trying to sail away or get away, he ends up staying there, and he ended up befriending someone.
Yeah.
Mr. Wilson. That's right. Yep. And that was Dennis the Menace. And Mr. Wilson was what?
It was Wilson soccer ball.
Soccer ball. And so for the longest time, people were there. And so that movie kind of, I don't know, almost like glorifies Castaway.
Yeah.
To where you could have fun or something, okay? But in the Bible, there was a guy who basically will show us what a true castaway is. And it's not really, what do I want to say? It's not really one of those situations that you want to get into. So let's go to the book of Judges tonight. Judges chapter 16 and verse number 18 through 21. This gentleman has been used for quite many different illustrations. And one of the things is this: there are times Judges chapter 16 verses 18 through 21. And this guy was a Nazirite. And in order to be a Nazirite, there were certain things that you had to do. One was not cut your hair, and another one was the food you ate. So you think about this, huh?
Good job.
Yep. And so think about this for a minute. Who else was known to be a Nazirite?
Jesus.
Yeah. So let's see. He was 33 years old and no haircut.
Interesting.
Boy, he sure would have gotten kicked out of a lot of churches.
Yeah.
And sometimes, when they portray Christ, you'll see them, they'll portray him with long hair. And a lot of people would say, no, that's not the Christ, But yeah, he was also, remember, he was Jesus the Nazarene. And so that's why you also will find, certain, his style and everything was totally different than a lot of people. So you've got this guy by the name of Samson. And one of the things that a lot of times people do not use is, I'll ask the questions. I'll just lead you on so that you'll give me the answer that I'm looking for.
You do that a lot.
I know.
Tonight's not any different. But that's the way to learn.
Was Samson a child of God?
Yes. I think so.
I shake my head. I think so, yes. I'm not so sure if this is a trick question. So I really don't know what to say because you're not responding to the yeses. And I really don't want to say no because I'm not so sure about this.
We've learned so well.
I know. The answer is yes, he was.
How do we know that?
Huh?
How do we know that?
How do you know that? Because when you look at his life and you find that God had a special plan for him and things for him to do. Now, you think about this for a minute. Was he always obedient to God? Huh? No. Because when you start looking in chapter 16, you start reading the story of him and a lady by the name of Delilah. And the very first part of it talks about how he saw Delilah and she was a prostitute. And he slept with her. Okay? And then started down this path.
So when Samson, I know it says Samson asked God to give him back his strength. I've heard so many different stories. Did he go to heaven? Did he go to hell?
Well, and this is where we're going. Good lead in, because there are so many times that you're going to hear people tell you that as a Christian, if a Christian goes into a backslidden state and they die within that backslidden state, that they lose their salvation. You also will hear, and think about this for a minute before you answer, you also hear that it's said that if a Christian or any individual commits suicide, that they go to hell. Now you think about this for a minute. Did Samson commit suicide?
Did?
Absolutely he did.
But in the Bible,
No.
in the Ten Commandments, where it says, "Thou shalt not kill," they,
Or
I
steal.
think I was taught in the Greek it's actually murder, but Samson,
He murdered people.
yeah,
When he pulled down the columns, he murdered people. But at the same time, he also took his own life.
yeah.
Okay? And so when someone talks to you about this stuff, just ask them the simple question, what about Samson? That was, he asked God for strength back so he could do that. So he could take his own life. Okay? But the thing of it is, and this is where I'm coming from, that Samson started out and God was giving him all this strength. He had a plan of what he wanted to do. And what Samson did was, he decided, I'm taking this path. Okay? And you look at what happened to Samson. Samson became a castaway. He was not able to do everything that God had wanted him to do. And so what we're going to look at is this. We've talked about it before, that God said that even before you were born, I had a plan for you. And in this plan that I've got for you, there are certain aspects of your life that I'm going to use to mold you, as we were talking today, in talking about how to stay calm in situations where everything is wrong or everything goes wrong. Because sometimes you think, okay, Satan has just bomb blasted me with all this stuff. Failing to realize that, hold on a minute, whatever's going on there, if you're a child of God, He is right there with you. He says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. I'm there. Okay? But that doesn't mean that when you step out of that path, that everything is going to be fine. Because God had a plan for you.
When you step out of that path, he's still there.
He is still there. And he had that plan for you. But when you step out of that plan and you decide to go your path instead of his path, you become a castaway. You're out there. Now he's there, okay? But the thing of it is, what happens is we get on this castaway island and we're out there and we want God to bail us out.
So is a person still saved when they...
Absolutely. Because he said, I am with you always, even until the end of the age. He never one time said, I am with you always until you sin. I am with you always until you backslide. I am with you always until whatever condition you want to put on it. The statement that he said that he has is a non-conditional statement. There are no conditions on that statement. Okay? But what you can find is that when you come to this, and you go back and let's just start here with verse 18. Okay? When Delilah realized, because if you go back and look up at some of it, and this is why one of the reasons that I like the CSB or the Holman, because it talks about she kept nagging him. And that's exactly what she did. She kept nagging him until he finally gave in. And here's what it says. When Delilah realized that he had told, and my pages stick together, told her the whole truth, she sent this message to the Philistine leaders. Come one more time, for he has told me the whole truth. Well, the Philistine leaders came to her and brought the money with them. Then she let him fall asleep on her lap and called a man to shave off the 7 dreadlocks. No, that's braids. They had it even before they started it. You know, it's cool. It was in the Bible, guys. Okay? The 7 braids on his head. And in this way, she made him helpless. His strength left him. Then she cried, Samson, the Philistines are here. Well, when he awoke from his sleep, he said, I will escape as I did before and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. Left him as a castaway. Okay? The Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes. They brought him down to Gaza and they bound him with bronze shackles. And he was forced to grind grain, he said, in the prison. So you think about it. So what got Samson into this condition? And when you begin to look, you have to start going back to chapter 14.
Taking his eyes off God.
Yeah, in the end, he didn't have any eyes to take off of God.
Was there a purpose in gouging out his eyes?
Well, yeah, because they didn't want him to see to be able to get away. And he didn't have any strength. And so they're going to use the strength that he had. He still had some physical strength to basically grind in the mills. Okay, so look at this. It says, Samson went down to Timnah and saw a young Philistine woman there. Sound familiar? Here we go. Even the Philistines. It caused him trouble again. He went back and told his father and his mother, I have seen a young Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as a wife. So the very first thing that happened with Samson was he was a Nazarite. He was not to marry out of the tribe. He wasn't supposed to marry a Philistine. Wrong thing for him to do. And instead of looking to God for who God wanted him to marry, he went down to this place. He saw this young Philistine woman who was very beautiful there. And here's what he said. Hey, Dad, go get me a wife.
Her.
Yeah, go get her as my wife. He didn't ask God one thing about this. Is this who you want me to marry? Is this what you want me to do? And he was a Nazarite. And he's stepping outside of the boundaries of,
Tempted by the world, the lust of everything the world's got to offer.
and what did they gouge out?
His eyes.
Because he's going by his eyesight. And his eyesight started causing his downfall. Okay? So what's he doing here?
In his own path.
Running away from God.
I am going to please myself, whether that pleases God or not. It's all about me. And yet all along, he was given for a purpose to his mom and his dad. He was a special kid, a special child, for a special time, for a special purpose. And when he comes to this point in time, as he's being brought up to understand that God was going to use him in a mighty way, he decided, I'm going to please myself, whether this is whether God likes this or not. When you come to that condition in your life, you are running a risk of becoming a castaway. When we become so self-centered that we become the focal point of what we're going to do. It's no longer about God or anybody else. It's all about what can please me. And a lot of times you find whole churches, not just an individual in the church. Sometimes you get a whole church that becomes self-centered. They're only worried about pleasing themselves internally. I don't want those neighbors over here. These people over here, hey, I don't want to hang out with them. I might start acting like them. Or worse yet, they might start acting like us. They may pick up some of our bad habits, and we don't want this to happen.
A lot of times when we go to do things, we forget to ask God what his purpose is in it and what does he want.
And the whole thing is to understand that this isn't to you. And Samson began to forget about this. And when you start looking from this on, you begin to start seeing certain things. You look at, go down to verse number
Can you not skip 4, because I don't understand 4?
Which passage would you just read?
Judges 14:1.
Yes, Judges
Sorry.
14, we did 1 and 2.
Still on Judges.
Okay, and so, but his father and his mother, okay, is this where you're going, verse number 4?
Yeah.
Okay, but it's a riddle. But his father and mother said to him, "Can't you find a young woman among your relatives or among any of our people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistine for a wife?" But Samson told his father, "Get her for me because I want her." Now his father and mother did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion against the Philistines. And at that time, the Philistines were ruling over Israel. And so they're saying, okay, why are you doing this? Okay, and what begins to occur is even in let me be very careful how I say this to you. I go back to Romans chapter 8 and verse 28. That there are things that we do that are bad. But what does God do with it? He's going to turn it around to good for those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. When you begin to look at all of this and you begin to see, what's going on,
It looks like verse 4 is saying this is God's will all along.
well,
Roundabout.
God's seeing this in an eternal perspective, okay? Not in a time limited. So he's seeing, okay, here's what's going to happen. Samson's going down there, seeing this girl. He wants this girl. He's going to come back to his father and say, okay, so here's what's going to happen. And his father and his mother saying, hey, hold on a minute. What are you doing? Can't you find a decent girl over here instead of going in this situation? No, this is where I'm going to go. Okay, that's where you're going to go. Then I'm going to take this and I'm going to turn it around for good. And when you look at the end of the story, God takes this marriage to this Philistine woman, and you've got to remember. Look at what he said. Okay, in verse number 4. At that time, what? The Philistines were ruling over Israel. It's almost like a parallel to Egypt and Israel. So now we have, and let's just fast forward to cover the story. So now what we have is we have God saying, okay, this is what you're going to do. I understand that. But I know the end of the story. And the end of the story is when he's there in the columns, all of the leaders of the Philistines are in the building
He killed more Philistines after he died
than he had ever done. But it wasn't just Philistines that he killed. He killed their leaders.
Yeah.
So now it's very easy for Israel to get out from underneath that bondage that's there.
And I hear what you're saying, and I see where you're saying that God is going to let us follow our own free will, and he's going to take any bad decisions we make, and he's going to turn those around and make good out of it somehow. But this, the way I read it, it's almost like it says it was the Lord's doing because he was looking for an opportunity to stir up trouble with the Philistines because the Philistines were ruling Israel.
We can look at it that way.
That's what it says.
Understand.
Credit.
But I think what he's saying in there is that yet, even when Samson is going to do his own thing, that God is going to turn that around and use it for his purpose.
Okay. That makes sense when I think about it, because it does say he was looking for an opportunity. He found that opportunity in Samson's
Yep.
attraction to delight. So,
And sometimes, let's do it this way, okay? God's whole purpose was to bring the Israelites out from underneath the control of the Philistines. That was his purpose, okay? Now, here's what he could do. Samson, I've got a plan for you. Even before you were born, my plan was that you are going to be part of that freeing of the Israelites. So what are we going to do? I'm going to let you be a part of it, okay? And in being part of that, Samson, I can bless you. Because you're doing a part, you're being involved in my plan. Here's my blessings. Because that's my purpose. My purpose is to get my people out of control of the Philistines. But Samson decided, no, I'm going in this direction. God says, okay, you want to go that direction? Go right ahead in that direction. But you don't understand something, Samson. I'm still going to use you for the purpose that I had a plan in for you to do. Now, the problem is that Samson didn't get to enjoy the blessings that God had in store for him, and he allowed the sin to rob him of those blessings that God had in store for him to do. And this is what we don't understand sometimes. It's like this. You've got to, I look at it like this. You've got a guy out here that says, I'm going to, I'll just use, oh man. You got a store that's opening. And they decide that here's what we're going to do. We're going to give away X amount of money. And that I'm going to give away $1 million. And that $1 million is going to be split among all of the people that answer this question. Okay? Now, you've got a chance to get a part of that $1 million. All you have to do is answer the question. Because they have decided they are giving away $1 million. Whether it's one person that answers it or 1 million people that answers it. And if you don't answer the question, then you don't get part of the pot. This is the same way with God. Guys and gals, God is giving away all of this. Everything that He has created, everything that He has, He's giving it away. And you have your portion. But your portion is based upon whether you operate in according to the plan. This is in the parable of the 5 and the 2 and the 1, where all 3 of them had a chance. Okay? And the one that didn't do what was pleasing to the Lord, I'm taking away your blessing and I'm giving it to this person. Because I'm giving away the whole thing. I'm not holding anything back. So you've got an opportunity to get your portion of it. And if you're being really faithful, you're getting your portion plus some. And what Samson did here was, Samson decided, I don't want to be a part of this. I want her. I'm stepping outside of the boundaries that God had placed for me and upon me. He raised me as a Nazirite. And as that Nazirite, there were certain qualifications that I had. And he began to do this. And when you begin to start looking in from chapter number 14 all the way from 15 and all the way through, you start finding that at first Samson looked at her and saw and wanted. And then what you find from chapter 15 through 18 is now he starts messing with Delilah. Okay? It's a good word to use, messing with her. And here's what here's what well, what happened. He would you understand, she's a prostitute. Okay? So Samson comes in and he starts messing with her. And every time he messes with her or sleeps with her, she asks him one question. And what was that question?
Where does your strength lie?
Where does your strength lie? Where does it come from? And what did he do? He told her, but he told her a lie. He didn't tell her the truth. We were teaching the youth this morning. In the Passover, remember, they said to take, when the Passover comes, that the very first thing that they did before they even started cooking anything, started preparing, the very first preparation time or thing that they did to prepare for Passover was what? No.
Say that again.
What was the very first thing that they did when it came Passover? The very first thing they did.
Blood on the door frame.
Huh?
Blood on the door frame.
No.
Washed and clean.
No.
Sacrifice?
Nope.
Oh. Didn't they have to?
They cleaned house. And what did they clean out of the house?
All the unleavened bread.
All the leaven or yeast.
Yeah.
Because they're going to cook. Okay? But before you could cook, and in the cooking was you're going to cook a sacrifice. Okay? But in that sacrifice, there could be no yeast or no leaven. Leaven is like yeast. Like you take a, you want to see what it is? I got the other saltines in somewhere else. This was actually made in Jerusalem. Okay, every year for Passover, they actually make this stuff in Jerusalem, and then they import it to the States. Y'all hungry? we're going to give you crackers and water. You are. That's right. It was terrible. Oh.
He drank that.
That salt water. It was terrible. That's unleavened bread.
Oh,
And this is leaven.
Okay.
And look at the difference.
Okay, this is the one with the ingredients added and then
This one has the yeast added.
added.
That one does not. What's the difference between the two?
The thickness of
the
it.
thickness of it, and
Just
then
makes it
go ahead and taste it. And what did the leaven symbolize? Huh? Sin, absolutely. And so what happened was, if you're giving a sacrifice to God, there's no sin in it. And so if you're going to cook a meal, then you need to get the leaven out of the house, because what happens if you take 3 cups of flour and you put 1 tablespoon of yeast in there, what's going to happen to that flour? Is all of it going to raise? Or just a portion of it? Huh? All of it will. All of it will. Because when you take and stir that yeast up, when you take and mix that yeast in with that flour and you stir it up, it permeates the whole flour. And what he's doing here, it's the same thing that happened. He looked at her, saw her, wanted her, and then his whole idea, his whole life was, now I'm coveting her. So what began to happen was this little bit of yeast that got into Samson's life, of this desire of looking at this woman, now has permeated his whole body, his whole life. And that's what God is trying to talk to us about sin. Okay? If we allow sin to grow in our lives, it will fester and permeate all of us. And I was using this illustration today with the youth. Okay, your hands, are your hands good or bad?
Depends on what you use it for.
Your hands are absolutely neutral. But what you do with your hands now determines whether they are good or bad. If you take those hands and use those to help somebody, they become good hands, right? But if you take those hands and slap somebody with them,
That's bad.
okay, or pick a fight, now those hands have become evil. Same thing with your eyes, your thoughts, every part of who you are. It is neutral until you sway it
So,
for either good or evil.
are you saying it's like our free will is bad? Our choices? I mean,
Our choices can be bad or good. And this is where God gives us the free will. He gave Samson the free will here. He had a plan for Samson. And God could have forced him, this is the way I want it done, and this is the way you're going to do it. But he didn't. He does the same thing with us. I have a plan for you. I've got it laid out. You've got a choice on whether you want to take those steps. It's an instruction manual, ladies and gentlemen. That's what it is.
Since you're talking about good and bad, can I ask this one question?
No, because it'll probably deviate me from here.
Because I was asked this once and I really wasn't sure how to answer it. I knew how I thought I should answer it. But I was asked by an instructor when I went to college, well, let me ask you this. And he said, is the world basically good or bad?
It's your personal choice.
And I had to sit there and think a minute. I wanted to say it was basically good, but then when sin entered the world, I mean, I'm not sure how, if somebody asked me that, should I answer it?
Okay. If someone wants to ask me, is the world good or bad? Here's what I would say to them. In the beginning, the world was absolutely perfect. But because of the free will of man, we have made it bad.
Fallen world, yeah.
Sin came.
Okay?
It is in the world.
The world had nothing to do with this. Okay? Because when God made all of this, God stepped back from this and said, this is perfect. And he put man in this perfect world. Man corrupted it. The world doesn't corrupt us. We corrupt the world.
So man is basically bad, right?
That is your free will.
Okay.
Okay? And what happens is this. The world outside is an inanimate object. Okay? That tree out there cannot make you bad. But you can go out there and just because you want to, destroy that tree.
That's bad.
And that's bad. Okay? Unless it's for firewood or something. You know, I don't know. But anyway, here's what we got. So she began, he looked at her, he saw her, he wanted her, and now he goes and he lays with her. And she's she's caressing him, not carousing. She is caressing him. He's laying there and she's just holding him and everything's great and everything's wonderful. And oh, by the way, Samson, I know you're strong. She could care less about Samson. When you look at it, she was going to be paid an X amount of money to deliver him to them so that they could destroy him instead of him destroying them.
Because every time she asked him, and they were ready right there to come in.
And they came in every time. He would tell them, and then she would call them, they would come in, and he would destroy them. And this just kept happening back and forth. And then if you go back into the last part of Judges with Samson, you begin to find, it's almost like Solomon, when he's writing a book of reflections in Ecclesiastes. And he's looking back on his life and reminiscing on all of the things that occurred and trying to give advice on, hey, this is what I could have had. This is what I should have done. And if I followed this advice, this is where I could have been. But because I decided to do it my way instead of God's way, here was the outcome. And this is kind of some of the stuff when you begin to look at this. Let's just kind of, when you look at some things, starting in chapter 19, I'm just going to pick out some things, okay? Starting around verse number 1. In those days, when there was no king in Israel, a Levite living in a remote part of the hill country of Ephraim acquired a woman from Bethlehem in Judea as his concubine. But she was unfaithful to him and left him for her father's house in Bethlehem in Judea. She was there for a period of 4 months. Then her husband got up and went after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back. He had a servant with him and a pair of donkeys. So she brought him to her father's house, and when the girl's father saw him, he gladly welcomed him. His father-in-law, the girl's father, detained him and stayed with him for 3 days. They ate, they drank, and they spent, the nights there together. You have a story coming out of the life of Samson, and look at where they're going. Ephraim acquired a woman from where? Bethlehem, not just any Bethlehem. Yeah, Bethlehem in Judah, because there were other Bethlehems, and remember remember when they said that Jesus was going to be born in Bethlehem of Judea. Look at what they said. Remember? Yeah, what good could ever come out of Bethlehem of Judea? And you're looking. Here's a story that's unfolding about this, and you find some of the things that were there. He came and got a wife out of where? Bethlehem of Judea. And what did she do? It says she was unfaithful to him. And he had to go, and with some donkeys and other things, go to, to deliver her father and all of these things. And you begin to start reading about the tribe of Benjamin. If you remember who Benjamin was?
Jacob.
Huh?
Joseph's brother. Jacob's son.
He had two favorite sons. Why? Do you remember why he had? Yeah. Benjamin and Joseph were the sons of Isaac. Remember when they came there, all the brothers came there. He says, "Hold on, don't you have a younger brother?" And what? And where's your dad? I'm not going to give you anything until you bring him here, because Joseph and Benjamin were born, had the same mother. All of the others had a different mother, and she was actually Jacob was the father, and remember he wanted Leah as his wife, and the father-in-law said, "Okay, if you'll do this for me, work for 7 years for me, then you can marry." I think it was Leah.
Leah was the older sister.
Was Leah the oldest one? Okay, then you.
And Leah's the one who wound up
Okay, and then what ends up happening was, on the wedding night, the father sneaks the other girl in there, and he sleeps with her, and at that point in time, that marriage is consummated, guys, whether he liked it or not. He got tricked, and then he came back and he said, "Hold on a minute, didn't we have an agreement?" And he says, "Yeah, but you don't understand. My older daughter has to be married first. You know the rules." And so he worked another 7 years in order to marry her. So, and that was who he really wanted. And he had she had two sons, Joseph and Benjamin, and I believe she died in childbirth with Benjamin, if I remember the rest of the story.
What section was that in?
That's in the book of Genesis. Yep. See, you got to read the book of Genesis, man. It's got some. It's got some.
Just like the world, so yeah.
You get past the begats and the begots, and it gets into some good stuff. It really does. It's awesome. I mean, honestly, you could take the Bible. You could take the Bible and start telling the truth about what's actually written in there, and it would be better than all the days of my life. Ruth Boaz.
Sunday school is just amazing.
Oh, it's crazy. I mean, you thought all my children was terrible? I mean, it's like here's a saga and a half. But when you begin to look in chapter 19 through chapter 31, you have a man coming down to the end of his life. Now, his eyes are cut out or gouged out. They had been keeping his head shaved so he couldn't break the chains. Okay? So as his hair would grow, they would make sure that it was shaven so that they didn't have to worry about him.
How did they find out that it was his hair when he lied to the wife?
Because the last time he told her the truth, that was the first ones that we read there in the 16th chapter, the 18th verse through 21. When she said, he finally told me the truth. And he said, and she called him one more time, and they cut his hair, and as soon as they cut his hair, they bound him and gouged out his eyes. So now he's at the end of his life. He knows, here I am reminiscing, and there's some great things that you had for me to do, God. And I failed you.
Well, couldn't God have been his eyes and let him know through?
He could have, and we'll show you, and we'll show you that as we kind of. I'll give you the Clef Notes of the rest of it, because what you find was that God had him appointed. We stated this already. God had him appointed to destroy the Philistines. Okay, and so it was. You're going to bring him up here and make a spectacle out of him. He's reminiscing and he's sharing his thoughts about his life, what could have been and what should have been. And now he comes down to the end of it and he says, God, I understand this is what you wanted me to do and I really failed you. Would you, one last time, give me back my strength so that I can serve you properly in my death the way I failed to serve you in my life. I will die doing what it is that you wanted me to do, even though I could have lived in doing this. And when you begin to start reading the rest of the book of Judges and hearing it from Samson's perspective, it's a sad story. And the reason that God gives us these things isn't just to skim through them. He gives us these stories of reality and real things, real lives of real people who actually existed, who actually lived, to help us to understand that if you do this, this is what's going to happen. Remember what Solomon said. Solomon said there is nothing new under the sun. Everything turns around in circles. Whether you like it or not, spring is coming. It will get here. And there will be a summer. It may only be on the 4th of July, but there will be a summer. And then there will be a fall, there will be a winter, and we're going to start it all over again. And you can always tell when it's springtime. It doesn't matter whether it's snowing. It doesn't matter whether how cold it is. You still got plants coming up. And the grass to cut. So anyway, so now he calls out to God for one last opportunity, God, to do what it is that you want me to do. And remember what he said to him? He says, will you just, he asked the people that were holding him, could you just put my hands on the pillars? Just, I can't see. Can you just let me feel those? And you think about it. God gave him the strength. He collapsed that whole thing and killed them all. And the nation of Israel was delivered. Okay? And so what happens a lot of times, you talk about deathbed confessions. And most of the time, the deathbed confessions that get a lot of publicity is when someone has killed somebody or wronged somebody, and on their deathbed, they make this confession, and the case is finally solved. So may I say this to you? I think a lot of deathbed confessions are made by Christians. When they're coming down to the end of their life, and they begin to realize, God, I have really failed you. I have really messed this up. And there are so many times that even in those deathbed confessions that somebody will tell you, hey, listen, you may have a parent that will say to you as a child, I'm so sorry that I did this, or I'm so sorry that I did that, okay? I'm not saying that they always will. But a lot of times, it's like trying to get a clearing of a conscience. But also trying to say, don't do what I did. Look to see, and here's what Samson is trying to tell y'all. Look to see what God's plans are for you and strive to fulfill them. Don't try to do what you want to do. Because satisfaction, whether you like it or not, satisfaction really doesn't come by doing what we want, but rather doing what God wants. And this is the whole point of the sermon this morning when we started talking about being, how to learn to be contagious in being calm. That is something that I think we would all want to catch, But it seems a lot of times what we want is to stay away from it. If that's contagious, I don't want it, But learning how to stay calm in those situations in a chaotic world is a trick. It's an awesome lesson to learn.
Do you think sometimes the chaos will come to you just so you can learn, that purpose he has?
Oh, absolutely, all the time.
So like for instance, the good working out the bad or working out for the good in different, situations.
Yep.
I be thinking that sometimes a lot of stuff is on myself, like this is a test. Let's see if I can pass it. Like I really feel like, instead of, working against it, let's see what,
I mean,
maybe I'm here for, a reason why all this is, to be like the mediator.
I meant to use this illustration in the sermon this morning, and I don't think I did. So let me finish tonight with it, if I can. Do me a favor. Think of something that happened in your life that was almost like totally decimated you. And think about how you felt when that happened. What was the first thing you wanted to do in that situation? Or what was the first thing you did? In that situation.
Well, like you call out for Jesus, whatever. You call out for him to help you.
That's a good one,
Yes, Mr.
but most of the time that's not what we do.
We'll be mad.
Retaliate sometimes.
Yeah, we'll be angry and
Angry, mad.
angry, mad.
We get angry, mad,
You know what I do?
things. But now, that happened a while back. Now look at that event. And can you look in that event and see where God was working?
Yeah, eventually, after a while, things like they say bad and works out for the good.
But in those situations, every one of them, can you not see where God was working? So was he working then?
I have to honestly say during the 5 times that I knew that he put his arms around me and kept me shielded from the situation.
It's only been 5?
It's only been
That's cool, man. 5 a week. Sometimes it seems like. Huh?
True devastation,
Yeah.
5 is a lot.
In situations. But sometimes, I don't know if you journal or, but sometimes if you do, or diary, or sometimes just write down your thoughts or whatever. It's always good to go back and look at those things, because at the moment, we're so close to the situation that we can't see what it was that God was trying to show us. And then when we step back away from it for a little while, it's kind of removed a little bit, then we can look into that situation. 20/20 hindsight's great. Because now we can see, God, what you were trying to do. We can see that, yes, you made me a promise and you kept that promise. I will never leave you nor forsake you. I will be with you always, even until the end of the age. It sure never seemed like it then. But now I know he was. Because if he hadn't been, I wouldn't have got through it. If he hadn't been, then I wouldn't be where I am today. And so many times we forget those things in those situations. And that was the whole point of today, was of being a contagious calmness. Is that if we can look at it from that perspective and remain calm. Now that doesn't mean that I'm going to like it. I'll tell you that right now. But I'm sure going to understand a lot better out of that situation.
Hello, this is Pastor Chuck Cotton from Calvary Baptist Church. First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for taking the time out to either listen to our sermon or to watch it on video. We are grateful that you've actually taken the time, and hope and pray that it has been a blessing to you as it was to us as we delivered it to our congregation. We ask if you have any questions whatsoever that you email us at pastorchuck@calvarybaptistmiddletown.org, or you could come in and give us a phone call, if you would please, at area code 513-423-7251. I'd like to take this opportunity to also invite you to come to our church and visit us, if you would please. We actually have small groups on Sunday morning starting at 9:30, with our morning worship following at 10:45. Prior to our morning small groups, we also provide donuts with coffee, milk, orange juice, a time for fellowship, get to know each other, have a good time before we actually break out into our small groups for Sunday. Our worship services are uplifting, they're fast moving, and everything in our service is just a fast pace. But we do take time every once in a while to slow down as we feel the Holy Spirit moving, and we never want to hinder it in any way. We also have on Sunday evening, and during the school year, we have Awana, and Awana starts with a Puggles, actually from age 2 all the way up through high school. And during that period of time, we also have a worship service. Both of these start at 6 o'clock and end at 7:30. Our Wednesday night, we have a Bible study, which starts at 7. We generally finish about 8:15. We would love for you to come and visit with us. Don't have to dress up. Just come as you are, because to us, it doesn't matter. You're a child of God, a creation of His, and so to us, you're important to everything that we do. Our motto here is building the kingdom one life at a time, and we hope that we have a chance to visit with you, get to know you as you get to know us. So thank you, and may God bless you.